yesterday's news.
Hello and welcome to Old News, the programme which looks at news stories of the day through the papers of yesterday. This week, buses. Very much in the news of late. Not for the right reasons, sadly, in that there's been no shortage of problems with staffing in the buses and numerous routes having to be taken off, causing some consternation for regular bus users. So I thought we'd have a look back and see how the buses have fared over the years in the Manx papers. And we'll go right the way back to some of the early days, I would imagine. The Manx Sun, July the 20th, 1895. The new bus service. Arrival of the buses, with two S's in buses. Interesting. On Thursday morning, the first four of the buses, purchased by the Isle of Man Tramway and Electric Power Company for the purposes of the Upper Douglas bus service, arrived at Douglas per the steamer Ellen Vannon. Gosh, we know what happened to her. It will be remembered that the running of a bus service between the Victoria Pier, Murray's Road, Woodburn Road and Broadway is part of the arrangement arrived at by the Tramways Company and the Douglas Town Commissioners, by which the former agreed to pay the latter annually the sum of £1,500 at least, and to construct and work a cable tram service to Upper Douglas in return for an extension of the lease of the Shore Tramway for 21 years and for other concessions. The buses are to run until the tram service is ready for traffic, and it will be a matter of satisfaction to those who look upon an improved means of communication between the lower and upper town as an absolute necessity if the upper town is to keep abreast of the times, to find that the bus service commences at once. The licensing committee of the commissioners on Monday decided to allocate the bus stand at the Jubilee Clock to the Bucks Road bus service and to appoint a stand as an experiment near the route of the Iron Pier for supplying the service up Broadway. The first bus will run tomorrow, that's Saturday morning. The service will run between Broadway and Victoria Pier via Murray's Road, Woodburn Road, Bucks Road and Prospect Hill. Some first buses. And the tramway, yes, you'll have seen pictures. Very few, I dare say, will now remember it. We skip forward to 1927, Saturday, May the 21st, in the Peel City Guardian. Commencement of bus service. The Manxland bus services opened their bus services on Monday on three routes: Peel to Douglas, Port Erin to Douglas and Laxey to Douglas. And if the opening day is any criterion of the popularity of the service, then it should prove very successful. Along the Peel and Port Erin routes, considerable enthusiasm was shown, and on the Peel-Douglas run, the first bus was greeted with cheers at various points. Can't imagine that now. While at Greba, bunting was flying from houses and trees. Mind you, they might be flying bunting if they see some buses in some parts of the island these days. With regard to Peel, the employees in Peel of Messrs T.C. Moore Limited, Tynwald Mills, St John's, arranged a contract to be taken to and from the mills daily, the bus leaving Peel at 7:40 a.m. and to be taken home at 5:30 p.m. And most of the employees took advantage of the new service on Monday, and those having unexpired contracts on the railway will come in as their contracts expire. The arrangement is most convenient as it takes the party right to their work. Of course it would. The first bus for Douglas left Peel at 7:40 a.m. and 20 passengers took the trip. The convenience of the service was well illustrated, as passengers were taken en route at places most suitable to the travellers. At Crosby, the bus was full and 2 passengers had to be refused. Further on, passengers got off and others got on, and at Douglas, some alighted in Peel Road and some at Athol Street, the remainder staying until the bus pulled up at Douglas Marketplace. The service continued hourly throughout the day, and most of the buses leaving Peel had nearly a full quota. The keenest interest was taken in the arrivals and departures of the bus, and there seems to be general feeling to support this new venture. The buses too are comfortable, and all who use them are delighted with them. Those were the days, eh? Friday, May the 14th, 1937, another 10 years further forward. Perwick Bay bus service. This is in the Isle of Man Examiner. The last, I think, was the Peel City Guardian, by the way. A further letter with regard to the Perwick and Fisted bus service was read at the Port St Mary Commissioners' meeting on Monday. The writer was a Mr James Scrimgeour of Perwick Bay Hotel. if that's how he pronounces his name, it's an unusual surname, who said he had gathered from the report in the Examiner that the manager of the Road Services Bus Company was prepared to run a bus service if someone would guarantee it against loss. Mr. Scrimgeour said a gentleman of his acquaintance was interested in this, and if necessary they would consider running a service on their own if the Road Services Company did not do so. It was decided to send Mr. Scrimgeour a copy of the letter from the manager of the bus company and leave the matter in his hands. Mr. Frank Madrill raised the question of the reinstatement of the road at Four Roads, Port St Mary, where cuttings had been made to lay telephone cables. He said the surface was very bad now, owing to heavy vehicles passing over it, and he moved that the attention of the Telephone Authority be drawn to it and a request made for immediate attention to it. This was carried. We go to the Isle of Man Examiner of Friday, November the 29th, 1940. Suspended bus service. Pulrose children's plight. The Education Authority's reply to the Town Council. The suspension of the school children's bus service between Pulrose and the Douglas schools was the most interesting topic at Wednesday's meeting of the Education Authority. Must have been fascinating. When consideration was given to the report of the authority's Finance, Works and General Purposes Committee, which contained the correspondence which was passed on the subject between the Reverend Dean Turner of St Mary's, Douglas, the Town Clerk and the Director of Education. It will be recalled that the question of the suspension of the service was raised by Councillor A.J. Tier at a meeting of the Town Council on November the 13th, when he declared that if children of his had to walk from Pulrose to a Douglas school in the kind of weather that it had lately been experienced, he would keep them at home first. Councillor Tier observed that the bus service had been suspended on the grounds that it was not profitable and that an attempt to obtain financial assistance from the Education Authority had failed. Councillor T.C. Cowan, chairman of the Tramways Committee, stated that they felt they could not afford a loss of between £5 and £6 a week on the service, and he expressed the hope that the Education Authority would reconsider their earlier decision. The report laid before the Education Authority on Wednesday showed that the following letter was addressed to the Town Clerk on October the 20th by the Reverend Thomas Turner. May I respectfully call your attention to the desirability of improving the bus service between Pulrose and Douglas to enable the Pulrose children to attend Douglas schools, particularly in wet weather. Parents have complained that on wet mornings their children have been unable to board the bus because it has been full to capacity. They argue that, through no fault of their own, they have been forced by the Douglas Corporation to live outside the town, and such being the case, the corporation ought to provide travelling facilities to enable their children to attend school. I should be very pleased if you would be good as to place my letter before the appropriate committee. 3 days later, the Town Clerk forwarded a letter of Dean Turner's letter to the Director of Education, Mr. H.L. Fletcher, M.A., with a request for the observations of the authority on the matter. On November the 18th, Mr. Fletcher had addressed a reply to the Town Clerk in the following terms: "Your letter of the 23rd of October and the copy of the letter from the Very Reverend Dean Turner have been laid before the Finance and General Purpose Committee of the authority. The committee have no observations to offer with regard to the letter itself, because the question of the adequacy or otherwise of the bus service in any part of the borough is clearly a matter for consideration by the appropriate committee of your council in the light of the representation it receives on the subject." You sometimes wonder how anything ever gets done at all when it comes down to committees and councils. Friday, October the 20th in the Examiner, 1950, bus service amalgamation. Safeway's sellout. I don't think that's Safeway's the supermarket. Pioneer of bus services on the island, Mr. Joseph Broadbent of Beelside, Brookfield, Crescent, Ramsey, proprietor of Safeway Services, has disposed of his business to Isle of Man Road Services Limited and will cease operations tomorrow, being a Saturday. Mr. Broadbent instituted a bus service between Ramsey, Andres and Bride over 25 years ago, and 7 years later he started to operate between Ramsey and Kirkmichael. The disposal of his business includes the transfer to road services of his 2 buses and a coach. By 1956 in the Examiner, Friday, September the 14th, we read of bus service economies. No bunting anymore. A Douglas Corporation Tramways Committee report recommending additional economies which could be affected in the bus service during the winter months. It was adopted at the monthly meeting of the Corporation on Wednesday. In the Times, Friday, March the 22nd, 1957, bus services to Port Erin is the headline. Woman Commissioner puts her case. Mr Tyson at Highway Board sitting. Statements refuted by Mr Sheard. A refutation of statements made by a woman Port Erin Commissioner that bus services in the south of the island were totally inadequate was given to the Highway and Transport Board members on Friday by Mr A.M. Sheard, Manager and Director of the Isle of Man Road Services Committee. At the board sitting in Douglas to hear an application for renewal of the company's existing licences, members heard Mr Sheard answering the Port Erin Authority's request for altered school bus services, augmentation of Bradder services with the introduction of a shopping bus, increased services from the airport, installation of route indicators and the staggering of bus and train services. Dealing with the school bus service, Mr Tyson stated that the present service left Bradder at 8 a.m. Her authority thought their requirements could be met by a single-decker leaving Bradder at 8:30 a.m. to connect with the 8:40 a.m. double-decker bus travelling via 4 roads. In this respect, she remarked that the bus services had contended that all buses were in use, but she understood that the Castle Rushen High School headmaster was objecting to children arriving earlier than they should. That's a first. By having an 8:30 a.m. service, more children could travel and gain more adequate protection. If we go to the Examiner of Thursday, July the 10th, 1958, we read of White City bus service, a town council debate and a move to reopen the route delayed. A White City bus service continues to remain in abeyance. Douglas Town Council yesterday agreed to accept a report by the Tramway Committee resolving that no further action be taken in regard to the White City bus service until the decision of the Manx Electric Railway Board on the compounding of the agreement with the corporation is known, and the council has reversed its decision of February the 12th, 1958. This followed an appeal by the committee chairman, Alderman R.F. Quayle, that nothing be done to interfere with the negotiations the committee were making with the new MER board, the constitution of which had been decided only the previous day. He promised that the committee would present a further recommendation to the council, perhaps next month. Alderman J.C. Farger accepted this position for the moment, and later in the meeting a notice of motion in his name calling on the council to rescind a decision on February the 12th discontinuing the White City service and to direct the Tramways Committee to restore the service forthwith was held over to the next monthly meeting on the ruling of the Mayor that it would materially increase expenditure. Nothing new there then, eh? And finally, Onken's own bus service, we are asked, or at least it's a question in the Isle of Man Times of Friday, September the 5th, 1958. Onken commissioners may have their very own bus service if Douglas Corporation refused to restart their White City route for next summer, as we've just been hearing. This suggestion for an Onken village bus service run by the commissioners was advocated at their meeting this week, and a unanimous decision on the part of the board means that such a service could become a possibility if the Douglas Corporation still refused to restart their route next year. It was decided to write to the local government board asking if there was anything preventing Onken commissioners from doing so. Does anyone remember if they did? 1958, 59? Did Onken commissioners go ahead and run their own bus service to White City and the like? I'm afraid I don't know. A little before my time, it's not something which has crossed my radar, but it might have crossed yours. If so, give us a shout. Howard Kane at manxradio.com is the email. Always delighted to hear from you. Suffice to say, buses then, buses now, buses probably in the future. They will carry on, and there no doubt will be news one way or another. New services, old services, failing services, succeeding services, whatever. It is, of course, all old news. Until next week, cheerio. You're gonna be yesterday's news.